Welcome to Africa's Vision Network. My name is Omar Ashaka, your guest host. Africa Visions Network is a program which focuses on the African and African American world. Topics of discussion relate to God, economic empowerment, health issues, music appreciation, writers, and a host of other topics that relate to the African and African American. Our program this evening is titled A Mother's Tears for Justice. Our special guest tonight is Mrs. Dorothy Cobb Elliott, the mother of Archie Elliott III, a young man who was killed while sitting in a police cruiser with his hands handcuffed behind his back. Welcome, Mrs. Elliott.
Thank you very much.
Tell us about the type of young man that your son was and the type of relationship that you had with him.
Well, my son was 24 years old. He was a very loving young man, and I think he was reaching the age where most young men would be thinking of getting married and starting a family. He loved to have fun, loved to have his friends over, and he was always joking with me constantly. There was a close relationship between us and also with his younger brother.
Okay. And how old is his younger brother?
John will be 18 the 29th of June.
Okay, so he would have been...
he was close to 12 when Artie was killed.
Okay. Are you a teacher, Mrs. Elliott?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and what grade level?
9th through 12th.
Okay. So you see a lot of young men in your classes, and...
Yes, I do. Had a difficult time sometimes dealing with that because some of them remind me of my son in the way they walk or their appearance.
Okay. It's my understanding that his father is a judge?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Ms. Elliott, tell us what happened to your son on June 18th, 1993 in Prince George's County, Maryland.
My son was killed by 2 police officers. He was fired at 22 times. 14 bullets struck him as he sat handcuffed in the front seat of a police cruiser. My son had worked that day on his job, and he was on his way home, less than 3 minutes away from home, when the car that he was driving was weaving, according to Officer Jason Levitt. The municipal police building is very close to the intersection where my son was stopped. He was pulled over and administered sobriety tests, which my son failed. He was subsequently handcuffed and placed in the front seat of the cruiser. At some point, a backup officer came, along with a ride-along, a young man who wanted to become a police officer. And as those 2 officers stood talking, one of them alleged that Artie was pointing a handgun at them.
Okay. Now, the sobriety test, was that initially done by 1 police officer?
Yes.
Okay, and he was handcuffed and placed in the cruiser by 1 police officer?
Right. Well, I think at the time when the backup came, he had not been put in the cruiser at that particular time because from the affidavits, it was stated that one of the other officers helped this first officer place him in the front seat of the cruiser.
Okay. Being placed in the front seat of the cruiser, was there an explanation for that? We usually see individuals who are arrested placed in the rear of the cruiser.
Well, Chief Mitchell, who is now former Chief Mitchell, said that a lot of things were unusual about that particular cruiser, and why he was placed in the front, he doesn't know. And it was alleged that he had been searched, not alleged, the officer admitted that he had searched Artie. But the chief of police for Prince George's County said that search would not have met their requirements.
Okay, but when you talk about a search, once again, your son, he didn't have on a shirt.
Right.
And he only had a pair of short pants on.
Yes.
Any socks? Do you know?
No socks, just the tennis shoes.
Okay. Now, the 14, you said he was struck 14 times.
Yes.
Was that with 1 police officer shooting or a combination of police officers? Or?
It was just those 2 officers. At the time that my son was put in the cruiser, or shortly thereafter, there were other officers on the scene, I think at least 3 or 4 others, and those officers did not discharge their weapons.
Okay. But there were at least 2 who fired those 22
yes,
shots?
Right.
Okay. Was there an internal investigation by the Prince George's County Police?
Yes, there was. Their findings were that the improper search precipitated the events that led to my son's death.
Can you explain that a little further? When they said improper search, what do they mean?
Well, as Chief Mitchell said, the search that was conducted by the municipal officer would not have been up to the standards of the Prince George's County police officer.
Okay. I'm sorry, because that confuses me just a little bit in the view of the fact he only had on primarily a pair of short pants.
Well, I've always said that if my son had had a cigarette lighter on him or a pack of gum, anything that would have given just a tiny bulge, they would have found it. Likewise, if he had had a weapon, that too would have been found.
Okay. Did your son own a weapon?
Never to my knowledge.
Okay. Did they find a weapon at the scene?
I really don't know what they found, but I do know that one of the officers placed a handgun on the trunk of the cruiser.
Now, when you say placed a handgun, was there an explanation as to who that handgun belonged to?
Well, they alleged that it was Artie's, but what happened when our son was pulled out of the cruiser, apparently a crowd had gathered after the shooting had ceased, and the people who were on the scene said they did not see a handgun. My son's hands were still cuffed behind his back.
Were there any tests conducted by the authorities just to see whether or not there were his fingerprints on the weapon?
No, not to my knowledge. Even the FBI did not check for fingerprints, and there was no explanation as to why they did not.
Okay. So was the investigation conducted by the Prince George's authorities as well as the FBI?
Yes.
Well,
let me back up a minute. The FBI supposedly did an investigation, and it was always my understanding that it would have been an independent investigation. But when I inquired later and asked them, did they do their own investigation, they said, well, no, they wait until all the other reports are in, then they look at those reports. So to me, they did not do an investigation because they said, why would we need to duplicate what has already been done?
Did you have legal representation, Mrs.
Yes, we did. Mr. R. Kenneth Mundy was our attorney, and of course he passed about a year after Artie was killed. And I must say that we were not pleased with the legal counsel that we had from there on.
Okay, the replacement for Mr. Mundy?
Yes.
Right. Have any other individuals come to you and says it's highly unusual that they would not run tests on the supposedly the weapon that they found?
No, I never heard any more about it, and I never did inquire again from the FBI.
As far as Prince George's County is concerned, is this viewed as a closed case, or where does it stand with maybe the state's attorney, Jack Johnson?
Well, unfortunately, when the grand jury did not indict, that took away all of the criminal charges. Our civil suit was lost because it was appealed to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals before it was heard in the federal courts in Greenbelt. And the three-judge panel in Richmond at the Fourth Circuit agreed with the police officers that they feared for their lives.
Were the police officers charged at all? Were they disciplined at all by the Prince George's County authorities?
No, they were placed on administrative leave, and as soon as the grand jury came out with their 7th month results of their investigation of no charges, then they were returned to duty.
Do you know what kind of evidence was used for them to establish no charges?
Oh, I wish I knew. I've always questioned why this case did not get beyond the grand jury. Okay. We know that there were judges who were looking for this case to come before them, and it really bothers me a lot that the grand jury just did not see fit to indict. But I also was told by someone who may have served on that grand jury that there is no way that your son's case should have ended the way it did.
Did the authorities, though, give you some type of official letter as to the... No,
I've never gotten any report whatsoever from the police officers. We were looking for statements from them. There should have been a police report released to us, but we've never gotten it. We've gotten what they would consider a police report by other police officers, but we want the reports by the 2 officers who did the killing.
So what is the reason that you've been giving as to why you can't?
Personnel reasons. And if we wanted to, we could go to, I believe, the circuit court in Upper Marlboro to challenge them on that.
Okay. It's my understanding that the policeman who shot your son allegedly killed someone else within less than 2 years after your son's death.
Yes, he didn't allegedly kill. He did kill someone else about 20 months after Artie was killed. And in this particular instance, he was the only officer who fired. He was back up again, and just one bullet was fired that killed Michael Donald Reed.
Was there any disciplinary action taken by Prince George's County
He
authorities?
was not indicted the second time either, and he is still on the police force.
So he's still an active
Yes, he
on
is.
the street police
Absolutely.
officer? Okay. Ms. Elliott, you know, with racial profiling, this is something very common these days. But I think what's interesting, I believe this particular police officer is African American?
Yes, the backup was, but the initial arresting officer was a young white police officer.
Okay. How has the Prince George's County leadership responded, i.e. Wayne Carey and some of the other leadership of Prince George's County? Have they written to you? Have they spoke with you, called you, expressed condolences? Have they responded at all?
No. What actually happened when my son was killed, Governor Glendening was the county executive for Prince George's County. He met with the chief several times, and there were press conferences with some of the religious leaders. But that was about the extent of it, and Chief Mitchell said he would give anything if circumstances had been different that day. And that was as close as we've ever gotten as far as any apology or condolences from the police department.
Now, I was at your press conference that took place, which was in regard to the 7th anniversary of your son's death. You mentioned that I think there's some kind of code that the police officers will do what they need to do until the threat is...
Well, we ask why was Artie shot so many times. In fact, his grandmother asked that question. And we were told by one of the high-ranking officers that the police are trained to shoot until the threat no longer exists. And that is a policy that I would love to see done away with. And if it is a national policy, then certainly it needs to be changed. And that's where the legislation comes in. But maybe that policy doesn't exist anymore, but you would think that it means that we're out to kill you, no matter what the offense is. And the police are not supposed to be killing people. They're not, their job is to apprehend and take them to jail if that's what their intent is.
And I believe it was discussed that Representative John Conyers is working on perhaps introducing a uniform police law?
Yes. That's one of the sections under his Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act of 2000. It has about 11 components, but that is one of the major ones that I think will be very beneficial and may sort of stem the tide of so many lives being lost.
Now, I think you had mentioned to me, while we talked before going on camera, that was there a reenactment of what supposedly happened with your son?
Yes, there was. The march to Annapolis ended with a reenactment by some of the attorneys who were representing us, just to show the crowd that it was virtually impossible to do what they claim Artie had done. And I think the police department themselves made a reenactment, but I simply refuted what they had done because it was a phony reenactment.
You said the police department actually did do a reenactment?
Yes, but the person that they chose did not look like my son, as I was cautioned to say, you know, this may be upsetting because he looks like your son. The attorney who was working with us at the time said, you know, this guy knows what they're looking for.
Right.
And I also said, was this young man inebriated like my son? And of course he wasn't. But I mean, a young man who cannot pass simple sobriety tests, who can't point his finger to his nose, could never point a handgun with his hands cuffed behind his back.
What was the purpose of the county police putting on a reenactment?
I guess to try to entice us to believe that whatever they said was true.
Wasn't that in itself a little unusual there?
Yes, I would think so.
Okay. All right. Were there any of the police authorities saying that our police officer would never shoot anyone handcuffed?
No, I never heard that.
Okay.
But again, my son was not in a position to do any harm to those police officers, and they should have known that. Common sense would have dictated that. Or training of any kind would have known that he was not in a position to do any harm to them. And after the grand jury's verdict came out, they stressed, and I'm sure this was the grand jury that set for my son, that made recommendations and said the police need to learn when to shoot, when not to shoot. They need to learn how to search someone. And I said, my God, it doesn't take a genius to learn that. I mean, you don't need any sophisticated equipment to learn how to search someone. So they, again, are blaming the improper search. And several other recommendations that they made.
Well, again, I have to admit, though, if someone is only wearing a pair of short pants, that's quite amazing that someone is saying there was an improper search. I'm just going to take a moment to share with you something from, there's an article from the Focus magazine from the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. This was a case back in September 1999. There was a Los Angeles police officer who broke the police code of silence, and he exposed a practice of police officers targeting minorities. And one of the things that this gentleman indicated was that he indicated that him and his partner actually shot a handcuffed prisoner. And I'll pass on a copy of this for you to take with you. Ms. Elliott, let me ask you this. You mentioned that you have a younger son, John, who's 18, and I believe you mentioned to me that he recently got his driver's license. What is that like for you every time that John takes the car, especially at night, and goes away from home? What is that experience like for you as a mother who has lost a son to this type of...
Well, I always caution him to make sure that he drives, obey the speed limits, and to drive very carefully, and to not stay out late, and not to have a lot of passengers in his car. And I always want to know where he's going.
Did you ever think that this kind of life-shattering experience would occur in your life?
It never. I guess it's something that you really don't think about, but I was fully aware of the dangers in the street, or the activities that were going on with the police. And my son also was aware of that, so he would always let me know where he was going, and if he was gone a couple hours, he would always call me. But no, I knew that it was happening to other mothers, and it just broke my heart to see it on TV. And I never envisioned that I would be one of those mothers.
With his father being a judge, someone whose job is to ensure that justice is given to parties going before him, how has he dealt with this tragedy?
I think Archie internalizes a lot more than I do. I'm more vocal with what goes on with me, but it bothers him tremendously to see what goes on in the courts. He knows that the police officers are constantly lying about their activities when they come to court. So I'm sure mentally it is very difficult for him.
Have there been any human rights organizations that have contacted you and expressed concern about how your son was killed?
Well, the ACLU has been...
American Civil Liberties Union?
Yes, and also Amnesty International has written a couple of letters, and I think some of the letters have come from Belgium and also from France. And the police department wants to know, why are they interested in this case? You know, this is happening here. It's as if they don't put a value on one person's life.
Okay, but when you say the police want...
They question why the outside interest in Prince George's County's affairs.
And who are they questioning, though? Are they?
Well, I guess the Amnesty International, the people who wrote the letters.
Okay. And Amnesty International, I gather, brought that to your attention?
Yes, because Amnesty International had representatives at one of our gatherings that we held at the courthouse.
And how did Amnesty International respond to the county police?
Well, I'm not sure whether they followed up with more letters or just what happened, but at least they went on record saying that they were opposed to what had happened to my son.
Okay. Also, I believe at the news conference you indicated that you had sent a letter to Chief Farrell, I believe?
Yes.
Can you share with us some of the things that were in the letter? And it's my understanding, when did you send the letter?
I sent him a letter around the end of June of last year, and again in July, and I also followed up in August. He has not responded to that certified notarized letter. We were asking for certain information, or my son's shorts were never returned to us. We wanted those. Whatever they may have that belongs to my son, we want. And perhaps from there we can develop another strategy for looking into my son's case.
And you're saying that you're just being totally ignored? There's no
Absolutely. Another letter was sent again this year before the 20th of June or the 18th of June. In fact, at least a month before. And I still have not heard from him. A certified letter was sent again.
Which means that you are in... You received something from the post office acknowledging someone's signing?
Oh, yes. They have received it without a doubt, because the return address, the return receipt has come back to me.
Did you copy anybody on that letter?
Yes, I did. I think the NAACP and maybe the county executive as well.
Okay. Let's talk real quick about the vehicle. I think you said that you had a chance to see the vehicle that your son was in, and you saw. Can you describe what you saw?
Well, I'll never forget the large bullet holes all around the cruiser, not just on the side where the two officers were standing, but even in the trunk and all around the back or the side of the car. And I always just imagine the huge bullet holes in my son's body. We went to see the cruiser that was parked in the parking lot of the District Heights Municipal Department, Police Department, and they opened the door, and I could see all this shattered glass because they had a dark green garbage bag on the passenger side of the cruiser. And when the door was open, I could see the dry blood that was in the doorway, so I just had to back away at that time. But I mean, it was very, very stressful seeing that.
Okay. Ms. Elliott, do you think it's time maybe to have cameras in police cars and maybe tape recorders, whereby it would be a law for officers once they arrest someone? I mean, they have cameras to catch individuals who are running red lights. What are your thoughts on something like that?
That would be
using
great.
Technology?
I believe that's being done, implemented now, and perhaps not in all of the county cruisers. I know the president of the NAACP had mentioned that Edith Flemings Hall had said that that was one thing that they were working with the chief on, and I believe that they have been installed, but not on all of the cruisers.
Okay. Is that something, though, you'd be willing to maybe write to your congressperson and trying to initiate that?
Well, if they have started the groundwork for it, and if they already have done it, then that's fine. But it would be great if they would complete all of the cruisers with cameras. Okay.
How do you feel, Ms. Elliott, when you're driving on the road in Prince George's County, knowing that you're the mother of R.T. Elliott III, and do you have any fear when you're driving, and do you have any fear as to, you know, if the police were to stop you? What are your thoughts about that?
No, I really don't. When I'm driving on the highway, there have been many, many times when I have cried so hard that I'm just overwhelmed at my son's death, and there have been many days that the tears just won't come, and I feel such sadness and a loss at my son's death, and I feel as though it should never have occurred. And the fact that it did occur makes me really angry, and also the fact that there has been no accountability. You can't tell me that these police officers should not have gotten some jail time, or that they should not have been punished in some way, or even taken off the force. One of the persons mentioned the 3 strikes and you're out. Cheney has killed twice. How many more times will he kill before it's determined that he should not be on the police force? And the chief has said, or the spokesperson said, well, you look at each case individually. You know, the police have just a few seconds in which to respond. Well, I said the White House shooter was apprehended by 2 men who were unarmed. And Hinckley killed, and there were so many Secret Service and Park Police around, no one else fired their weapons except Hinckley.
Do you know, you mentioned Officer Cheney, do you know if there's a policy or procedure whereby after a police officer kills someone, the person gets some type of psychological counseling? Do you know if there are any mechanisms?
I really am not sure. I know that was one thing that my sister had mentioned when Artie was killed. She said that they test them for drugs, that they test to see if they were drunk, and the Bill of Rights for them really protects them. It's incredible how they don't have to make a statement.
Okay. Let me ask you this right quick. Do you feel that if a police officer, definitely by time if he kills 2 people, should there be some type of notification to the community that there's a police officer in a certain county or community that has killed 1 or 2 people? Do you think that the community should be entitled to that?
Oh, yes. The people in the community where Officer Cheney was serving, you know, his patrol duty, those people were amazed that he had killed twice, and they had no idea.
Okay, Ms. Elliott, time has really just gone by. What we're going to do is, in tribute to your son's, the 7th anniversary of his death, and in memory of that, we're going to light the candles, and we're going to just play another song that's a little different, especially for your son. And we want to thank you. We want to say, hope that God will be with you, and that justice, that a mother's tears will indeed get the justice that your son deserves. But thank you very much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much.
We certainly appreciate it.
It's very helpful for me to do this.
Thank you.